Hey guys, Stay Patient here, and welcome to this week's Trophy Hunters Hangout. This is a show where we discuss topics and answer questions that have been raised by my Patreon community. So we're going to start off by saying a big thank you and welcome to Damon Randall, Tracy Walker, and Jaden Baird. They're all my new patrons this week, so if you want to check out the page and have a look at all the rewards there, the link's in the description below. But today we're going to be talking about a couple of different subjects actually. The first one was raised by Chris Alott a couple of weeks ago. Now this hasn't sort of merited a full episode on the subject because it's a subject that I don't really know much about. He's brought up the idea of including PlayStation Now with PlayStation Plus. Now I've never used PlayStation Now, I've got quite a large PS3 library as it is, and I've never really had the need to sign up for it. But he does raise some interesting points, so I thought I'd let you guys know what he was mentioning, and you can kind of give your own feedback in the comments below. He spoke about how it used to be free to play online on PlayStation back on PS3, and he mentioned, I've got his message on screen here, he mentioned how the online side of PlayStation has lost a percentage of gamers because some people don't want to pay for that online experience. I would actually argue that I would prefer to pay for online simply because last generation, the PlayStation Network was considerably less reliable than Xbox Live, and that was largely down to the fact that Xbox had the money coming in, from Xbox Gold. They were able to put more money into making sure the servers were stable and everything. Of course, on the PS4, we've had our fair share of issues, but that's mostly based on hackers. And of course, recently they've taken some steps to try and stop that happening. We've got the two-step verification now. So all the money we're spending on PlayStation Plus is sort of funding Sony's ability to improve the stability and also the security of the PlayStation Network. He goes on to mention, though, about the free games on PlayStation Plus. Of course, this is a feature that's been around for PlayStation Plus members for a long time, long before it was required for playing online. And he mentions that the PlayStation Now library is growing and becoming, a lot better. It's showing a lot of promise, he says. Now, I think the one thing that I would absolutely agree with is the fact that the PlayStation Plus games, the free games, have really dropped in quality since it became mandatory to have a PS Plus account. Now, back on last generation, PlayStation Plus was very much an optional extra. It was something for big PlayStation fans and people who wanted to get the most out of their PS3 could sign up for. And of course, the free games was basically that was like the main reason people signed up for PS Plus, because you didn't need it to be able to play online. So they had to make those games good. They had to make it worthwhile because that was the main feature that drew people towards PS Plus. So last generation on the PS3, there were some really big games. Every single month you had a big AAA title that was made free for PS Plus members. This generation, though, obviously they no longer need to worry about making those PS Plus freebies that attractive because that's not the main draw of the PlayStation Plus membership. The main draw is the fact that if you want to play online, you have to have PS Plus, you have to be signed up for it. So I do agree that that is a shame that, the games have dropped. I think, it's not as bad as some people make out. I think it's quite nice having a lot of indie games that we wouldn't have otherwise tried. It doesn't save us as much money. That's the main thing. Last generation, you would get possibly hundreds or even thousands of pounds worth of games throughout the year as a PS Plus member. But nowadays, you're getting a lot of cheap games, a lot of indie games, and I do like that, like I said, because there's a lot of games that I wouldn't have bought, I wouldn't have tried, but then I end up giving them a go, and they end up becoming very popular. And it also gives, smaller developers a springboard, as it were. So with games like Rocket League, when that was made free on PlayStation Plus, basically everyone had access to it, everyone played it, and it gave everyone the opportunity to see how great it is, and it really helped launch that game into the stratosphere. It's a huge game now, it's big in the esports world and everything, but I do agree that they have become quite lax with the PlayStation Plus games, simply because they don't need to make them that attractive anymore. So this idea that Chris has come up with of including PlayStation Now as part of PlayStation Plus, it's a nice idea. Obviously, we'd all love to have more things, if we're paying for something already, we'd always love to have more things added to it. I would argue that they would need to increase the price. So if they bundled it all together and that was the only way you could buy it and it made it more expensive, then a lot of people would be very annoyed. They would say, hang on, I don't want PlayStation Now, so why can't I just pay for PS Plus, and vice versa. So I think maybe the idea of having an option of having PS Now included for an extra price, if you like, maybe having a bundle that includes both of them, that could be a good idea. And as Chris says, that would probably benefit us, the gamers, we'd save some money, but it would also benefit Sony because I think a lot more people would sign up for it. Now, I haven't actually looked into the pricing structure of PlayStation Now. It could be that you do get a discount if you're a PlayStation Plus member, but if they made like an actual bundle, when you sign up for PlayStation Plus, which everyone does, if it came up with a screen saying get PlayStation Now for 50% less or whatever, or 25% less, if you sign up for PlayStation Plus, a button you can click on that takes you to a page that purchases both services, then I think that could be a good idea. But those of you out there who have had experience with PlayStation Now, let us know what you think of Chris's idea of bundling both together. Like I say, it's something that I personally have very little experience with, but it'd be interesting to hear your guys' feedback. The main subject we're going to be covering today, though, was actually raised by John Rogers, and I have a comment to read out from him. He has basically brought up the idea of, discussing the trophies that we really hate and which trophies I particularly hate. And he's written out a piece here that I'm going to read through. I'm going to give some feedback on whether I agree with or disagree with the comments that he makes. And then I'm going to talk about some of the particular types of trophies that I particularly find really annoying or frustrating, or that I think they should just leave out of games. John says, given that you review trophy lists weekly and have certainly played through your fair share of them, I'm interested to hear your take on the various types of trophies. In other words, imagine you are hired as a trophy consultant to a developer studio. How would you advise them to utilize their trophies, and what would you urge them to stay away from? Now, I think this is a great idea. Maybe development studios do this, I don't know. But I really do think each dev should have at least one big trophy hunter who's part of the trophy hunting community on their staff, or at least, as a consultant, coming into the office when they're discussing what trophies to put in a game. They should just give them the game, let them play through it and say, right, what do you think of our trophy list? Are there any trophies we should leave out? Are there any that we should add in or adjust the requirements for? So I think this is a really good idea that we have discussed a few times on the channel. He goes on to mention some of the types of trophies that he particularly hates, and I think a lot of you guys will agree with these. He says, personally, long grinds of simple to moderate difficulty tasks put me off. So he's talking about, a trophy that requires you to do something very basic in the game that doesn't require skill over and over again. Now, I'm actually going to talk a bit more about that because there's one specific trophy I want to bring up, but I do totally agree with that. If there's a trophy that requires you to do something that you can do while playing the game, then that's fine. If you're able to, get through that trophy while playing through the game naturally, it just kind of reminds you of a certain feature of the game. It's like, don't forget, you can do this. And you're like, oh yeah, cool, I forgot about that. I'll make sure to incorporate that into my playstyle. So that's fine. But if it's the kind of trophy that there's no way you're going to earn it naturally while playing the game, even if you do utilize the feature that it's referring to on a regular basis, if you have to grind it out at the end of the game and it's not a difficult task, it doesn't take any skill or anything, then I do agree. I don't understand why those trophies exist in games. He goes on to say, I also dislike having to play through the same game all over again because the requisite difficulty setting isn't available from the start. Now, this is actually something that I disagree with, I'm afraid, John, which I'm sure you're actually glad to hear me disagree with something because it makes the discussion a bit more interesting. When I say disagree, I don't mean I completely disagree in every context, but there are some games that I think you really do benefit from, playing through on a lower difficulty to learn the game and then playing the higher difficulty. Because there are often features of the game that you need to kind of learn, you need to get used to make the higher difficulty playthrough more enjoyable. Obviously, if the game plays exactly the same on easy as it does hard, maybe like a Call of Duty, for instance, you just need to take more cover and be more careful, then sure, I agree that you should be able to just jump in straight to veteran difficulty or whatever it's called. But I think with some games, you really do benefit from being able to do a lower difficulty first. Now, I think sometimes this also encourages you to play a game twice. This is another benefit, I think, because with games like, for instance, The Last of Us, we've talked about this before, but it plays very differently on the lower difficulties as it does on the higher difficulties. It's a completely new experience, So on the higher Survivor difficulty or Grounded that was released with the DLC, those settings, they turn the game into a survival game rather than a shooter. And you have to very much stealth, you have to be very careful with your supplies and the things that you craft. You have to be sort of very stingy with how often you use them. And, having played the game through on a lower difficulty allows you to know the levels, So when you go into an area, you know what's coming up and you can think, right, I'm going to keep my explosives for that section. I'm going to keep this ammo here for that section. And it becomes more of a strategic sort of, game that you have to plan for. You have to plan your approach to different sections. Now, I don't actually think that The Last of Us does lock out the top difficulty, but this is just a good example of how games can be more enjoyable if you do have to play them through twice, and especially if you play them on a lower setting and then a higher one, if those settings do sort of present a different style of gameplay. If you play on easy, then you're playing a shooter and it's still very much enjoyable. If you're playing on hard difficulty, you barely shoot your gun at all throughout the whole game. I think I completed the whole of The Last of Us on Survivor shooting like 5 bullets or something, because if you shoot a bullet, then it alerts all the enemies and then you just don't have enough ammo to take them all out. So in some circumstances, I do think it's beneficial to be forced to kind of play on a lower setting to unlock the higher setting, and then take everything you've learned from that, the easy difficulty run that you've done, carry that across to the hard difficulty, and then adjust your approach to sort of counter all the new challenges that you come across. Another great example, which is another game we spoke about recently, is BioShock Infinite. Now, this is a game that, difficulty-wise, there's not really any benefit to playing on easy than hard, but, the fact that you have to play through once on easy to unlock the 1999 mode difficulty, without using the Konami code, of course, you can you can unlock the difficulty by putting a cheat code in. But if you play it through twice, then you get the benefit of all of these kind of pieces of dialogue, all the story sections, all of the just the conversations between some of the characters that make no sense on the first time through, but then take on a whole new meaning when you've completed the game and you know how it ends. You know what the twist is, you know what's going on, and you can play back through the game, and it's so interesting. Some of the dialogue, it just blew me away. I was like, wow, I didn't even pick up on that. And it's literally dialogue that wouldn't mean a thing to you. Even if you listened very carefully, you couldn't piece together what they were talking about during your first playthrough until you know how it ends. And it just, it brings a whole new level to the narrative that is really, really fascinating. So although I do agree with you when it comes to just basic campaigns, if it's a game that you only really want to play through once, like a shooter or something, and you're skilled enough to be able to dive straight into the higher difficulty, which plays exactly the same, but it's just, you take more damage or you do less damage or whatever, then I do agree. You should be able to just jump into the higher setting. But in some games, you do really benefit from playing through twice, and sometimes you do benefit from playing on 2 separate difficulties that do require a very different approach. He goes on to say, more than that though, I really do not like multiplayer trophies. This is something I know a lot of you guys agree with. He says, especially those that require someone in your friends list to own the game as well. Long grinds versus a simple bronze for trying out the game mode, and dependency on a server with a short lifespan. So as we read in John's comment during the Why Do We Trophy Hunt video, he did mention how there are lots of game modes that he would never have usually tried out before he became a trophy hunter, but now it's broadened his experience of games because he does try those modes out for the trophies, and then if he enjoys them, he keeps playing them. Now that's the idea of those types of trophies. If it says, try out the online or play one match in the online or get a win or something, the idea is that you try it once and then if you enjoy it, you stick with it. I personally, being a big trophy hunter, I tend to not stick with a game once I've earned all the trophies. So with a game like Titanfall 2, which only has 3 trophies, they're all ones that you can earn within one match. I may have mentioned that, sorry if I'm repeating myself, but you can literally go in, as long as you win the first match, you can then go into the menu system and unlock the other 2 online trophies. And I was actually a bit disappointed because I find it very hard to motivate myself to play a game once I've earned all the trophies, because I have such a huge backlog of games I really do want to play and that I can be earning trophies on, that if I stick with a game like Titanfall after having earned all the trophies and the platinum, then I feel like I'm kind of just getting behind, which is a bit silly. But I suppose as a YouTuber as well, I like to try and keep up with games, which I'm not doing a very good job of, but a lot of you may be the same. I personally move on from a game when I've got the platinum, and it's not because I'm depriving myself of enjoyment. I just know that I can get the same level of enjoyment from another game, and I'll also be earning trophies from that game. So when I saw that Titanfall 2 didn't really have online trophies, I was actually a bit disappointed because I thought, right, I'm not going to be motivated to carry on playing it And I do enjoy the online. I bought it on Xbox One, the first one, when it first came out, and I had fun with it, but I didn't stick with it for very long because I'm not an Xbox player. So that actually disappointed me. So I sometimes like it, if the game's got a good online feature, if it's got a good, online mode, then I do like it to have a few trophies because that gives me the motivation to stick with it. Of course, most of you guys out there will stick with an online mode if you enjoy it. You won't need trophies to keep playing it, depending on how serious a trophy hunter you are. So for you guys, this is probably something that you will agree with, the idea of only having simple online trophies. Just try out the mode, and if you like it, stick with it, but we're not going to force you to. Now, I do totally agree that some games have very much tacked on online. Games like Tomb Raider from 2013, that was ridiculous, You had this online mode that completely wasn't required in the game. You didn't need it. It was a great game without it. And the thing is, I think with games like Tomb Raider, if it was just the single player, if they released the game with just the single player, then everything about the game is great. So it would get a good review. It would get a very high review. But as soon as they start putting online in, and the online's not great, it's probably unfair because it's like extra content, but reviewers tend to sort of mark games down because, if some of the content in the game isn't up to par, then it kind of drops the score down. So a game with bad online is probably going to get a worse review score than a game with no online. So it's not always a case of more is better. It's a case of make sure what is there is really good. And then, people are going to play it off the back of that. And then when you sort of start throwing trophies into the mix, as Tomb Raider did, they've got this mode that was dead pretty much from day one. No one was playing it. You had to boost, and the requirements were ridiculously high. It was as if they were expecting Tomb Raider to take over from Call of Duty or something as like the go-to online multiplayer game. So I do totally agree. When there's trophies related to online modes like that, that's ridiculous. But when it comes to something like The Last of Us, where a lot of thought has gone into the online, into the multiplayer, and it's actually really, really good, if that hadn't had any trophies related to it, I would have played through the single player, I would have earned the platinum, I would have loved it, I would have had a huge amount of fun, and been blown away by how excellent the game was, and then probably not have bothered with the online, because I would have thought, right, I've had as much enjoyment as I could ever wish to have from a game from this already. I don't need to play the online, it's already one of the best games I've ever played, so I'm just going to move on to play something else. But because there was trophies related to the online, and because the online is so, so good, it forces you to play it, and I'm really glad I did, and I had a lot of fun that I wouldn't have otherwise had. So I think if the online is good, I think they should put trophies in with it. If it's not great, I mean, like with Tomb Raider, it's not just that I think they should have left the online trophies out. I think they should have left the online mode out completely because it was pointless, it was tacked on, and it just felt unnecessary, When it comes to this idea of trophies that require you to have someone in your friends list that owns the game as well, so, maybe a trophy for playing with a friend or reviving a friend or whatever, I think the benefit of this is the fact that it encourages you to find other people who are trophy hunters or who are players of that game, and it expands our collection of friends and of sort of fellow trophy hunters in our friends list. Now, this is very useful because whenever you need to jump onto a boosting thread, maybe on PlayStationTrophies.org, and say, look guys, I'm looking for someone to earn this trophy with, and then a few people add you and you start building your friends list, you can sort of hone that friends list to just contain, obviously, your real life friends, but also people who are trophy hunters like you and have a similar taste in games because you found them while playing the same game that they were playing. And what happens over time is you build up a collection of trophy hunters on your list, and it becomes easier and easier to find people to be able to hunt with, when games come out with online trophies, rather than going on, onto websites and forums and trying to find people who are playing it. You can literally go to your friends list, and because you've been building up a collection of other trophy hunters in your list, you'll inevitably find people playing the same game as you when it first launches, or maybe a few weeks or months later. And it makes the whole idea of online trophies that much easier because you have a pool of people that you can sort of call on and team up with at the drop of a hat, pretty much. He also mentioned servers with short lifespans. Now, if we're talking about sort of big games like Battlefield or Battlefront, big online games that get regular updates that keep people playing, then they're usually fine unless you're playing them years and years down the line. But even then, you could probably go back and play sort of Battlefield 4 now, and it would still be very much active. But yeah, when it does come to the games with tacked on online and they're not adding, they're not sort of updating the game or adding sort of online DLC or anything like that, a bit like Tomb Raider, we keep mentioning it. But games like that, they do become dead after a while. And the thing is, with trophies like that, if you're playing the game later or you've done the single player and you come back to try and do the multiplayer later to finish off the trophies, then that can be a real pain. I do agree with that. But I think there is a way around it. I think a great example of this is Killzone Shadowfall. Now, that had a lot of online requirements. It was quite difficult. It was very long-winded. And as the game started dying, as it started getting quieter, they added the ability to play against bots. And, you could earn trophies against bots. You could earn all the requirements related to all the online trophies. You could grind away at, leveling up the different weapons and abilities and things like that. And I think that's a great idea. I think they should include that in all of the online games. Give it maybe a certain period of time. Give it like 6 months or a year, depending on how popular the game is, maybe a couple of years. And then when the game starts dying, add the option to earn those trophies in another way. Don't sort of just give everyone the trophies, obviously, but throw in a new option, like playing against bots, for instance, so that you can still go ahead and earn those trophies if the game is dead. I think that's a really good idea. He says, on the flip side, I do appreciate trophies that encourage you to spend some time with each game mode, those that permit, but do not require, co-op of the main game with a buddy, and those that require you to do some fun, offbeat, miscellaneous tasks during the game. Yeah, so I agree with all that. They're all very fun types of trophies to have in a games list. As we mentioned before, he spoke about this during the Why Do We Trophy Hunt video. We read out John's comment there, and he mentioned that he does like being encouraged to try all these different game modes just once, like we mentioned with the online trophies, at least, have a trophy for trying out every mode in the game, just to get a flavour of what's available, and then you can choose whether you want to stick with any of it. He then mentions about co-op trophies where you can play co-op but you don't have to. I think a great example of this is Borderlands. It's a 4-player game, but although there are like a few requirements where you need to have a second player, it's not like complete the game with 4 players or do a certain number of missions with 4 players, Most of them can be done with 2 players and you only need to play a small amount, You've got like a few requirements for the challenge-based trophy where you need someone in the gunner seat of the vehicle that you're driving. Then you've got some that require you to duel with another player, which is, again, like that's a good example of just showing you that something is possible in the game, like encouraging you to try out not so much a mode, but like a feature of the game. So, you'll duel with a player, you'll trade with them, something else. A lot of the trophies that are related to co-op are all about just making you aware that certain things are possible in the game, which I think is very important. That's one of the key kind of key benefits or the key reasons for a trophy, is just to make sure you're aware of some of the features and some of the things that you can do, maybe some of the skills and abilities and things like that. And he also mentions there about, the fun offbeat tasks that you can carry out during the game, things that you might not realize are possible, just silly little things you can do that just kind of add a little bit of fun and humor to the game sometimes, and just kind of break up the gameplay a bit. You can be like, oh, you know what, I'm going to go for this trophy now. It seems like a laugh. So I'd like to say a big thank you to John for taking the time to type that out and share his thoughts with us. We'd love to hear your opinion on all the comments that he's made there. But now what we're going to do briefly is take a look at some of my personal most hated trophy types. First up is a category that really goes without saying. John didn't comment on it because it's pretty much a given, and that is glitch trophies. Now, some studios are very good with glitch trophies. They put a lot of work and time into making sure they're fixed. I mean, I would argue that they should be working from day one, but, we're always going to get things that aren't quite working properly when the game launches, so I don't mind so much if they get straight on it and they communicate with the community. They let us know that they're working on it. They say, look, don't worry, we're going to fix this by this date or whatever. But sometimes they show no sign whatsoever of even bothering to try to fix those glitch trophies. Now, one game that comes to mind is Crisis 2. Now, this had 2 trophies that were quite heavily glitched. They didn't glitch for everybody, so people were never sure whether they were going to unlock or not, and they were both online trophies that were very long-winded. I put a ton of time into the online of Crisis 2, and it's a good job. I enjoyed it, to be honest, but everyone was posting on the Crytek forums, they were emailing them, tweeting them, And the worst thing about it was the fact that they just didn't answer at all. They just went dark on it, And I still, to this day, I don't know if those trophies are working properly. I managed to get the trophies to pop eventually. This was on my old Tommy T account, but it took a huge amount of time. You have to reach the top level in Prestige, and you're supposed to be able to get 2 trophies by doing that, as long as you've unlocked all of the weapons or the attachments or whatever it was on the way through. And I did all that, obviously, and then the second time through, you're playing through, and you just have no idea if the trophies are going to randomly pop at some point or not. So you're really chasing your tail, as it were, and that really annoys me. When companies just don't communicate, they should realise that Sony expect games to have achievable trophies, and they should respect their fan base. They should respect the people who are playing their game and make sure that they are receiving a product that works, or that is, at least made to work further down the line. I think the lack of communication, that's something I really, really hate. And in fact, since then, since the Crysis 2 trophies, and since Crysis 3, which was very technically impressive, but not really an enjoyable game. And, after I read some of Crytek's comments where they said that graphics are the most important thing to gamers these days, I pretty much boycott their games, I have no interest whatsoever in sort of getting excited for any Crytek games that are coming up. I think they've completely destroyed their reputation through their lack of customer support on Crysis 2 and, the direction they took with the more recent games. Now, the next kind of trophy I'm going to mention isn't something I necessarily hate, but it's something that can be quite annoying in certain circumstances. And this kind of ties in with the idea that John mentioned of having to have a friend that plays the game as well. I don't mind that so much, but what I do mind is when a trophy that you're working on relies heavily on other players in the game, and especially if it relies on random people, So if it's a game where you need to do something a certain number of times, but your team also needs to do something a certain number of times, or they need to win the match or something, there might be a trophy for being the highest scoring player on the winning team. And you might be by far the highest scoring player in a game, but if your team sucks and they lose, then you've put all that work in, you've done all the work, you've done what's required of you, but you don't get the trophy. Little things like that can be really rather annoying. I was trying to think of some examples and I just couldn't think, because there's been so many games and trophies over the years, but there have definitely been some games down through the years that I've played that have a trophy that's maybe really tough to earn, and you finally fulfill the requirements, but somebody else does something that ruins it for you. That is just the most annoying thing. Something I do like is when games give you a reason to play on a higher difficulty. Now, I'm not necessarily just referring to trophies here. That is one way that they can motivate you to play the highest setting, is by giving you a trophy related to that difficulty. A game that springs to mind is, for instance, Fallout New Vegas. Now, that wasn't so much about playing on the highest difficulty. You could play on any difficulty you wanted, but there was a trophy for completing it on hardcore mode. So you could play on very easy difficulty, but you could turn on hardcore mode as well, which would add a whole load of new features to the game. So it made it more enjoyable. It gave you sort of hunger to worry about, thirst, tiredness. So it really added to the experience, and that was all through a trophy. Now, the reason I bring this up is because if there are no trophies related to difficulty levels, then I just can't decide what difficulty to play on. Because as a trophy hunter, quite often I'm trying to get through a game at a reasonable pace. I'm trying to enjoy it to its fullest and get everything out of the game. But because I have a lot of games to play, and I like to play a lot of them so that I can talk about them on the channel, I don't sort of dawdle too much. I try and sort of make my way through the game at a decent pace. And so if there's no trophy related to difficulty, and if the higher difficulties don't benefit you in some way, then it's almost like, well, why would I play on anything higher than normal? Now, what I think is great, what I really love, is when a game gives you motivation to play on a higher setting, but you don't need to for the trophies. Now, a great example of this is, again, Fallout. Now, Fallout 3 and New Vegas last generation gave you XP related to your difficulty. So the lower the difficulty, the less XP you'd get, the higher, the more XP you'd get. So that was like a real motivation to try and play on the highest difficulty you could. But if you were struggling, or if you were finding things were taking too long, then you could step the difficulty down, and you could go all the way down to very easy if you wanted, and still earn all the trophies. Now, an even better example of this is Fallout 4, which doesn't change the XP you earn based on the difficulty. You get the same on all the different difficulties from very easy up to survival, but it does benefit you to play on a higher setting, because the higher the difficulty, the more legendary enemies you come across, and those legendary enemies drop legendary loot. Now, you don't need the legendary loot to complete the game, because if you're playing on very easy, then you can fly through with pretty much any weapon. But the ability to find more legendaries just makes the game more enjoyable, because they're a lot of fun to use. So I do think that every game should have some motivating factor to play on the higher settings, whether it rewards you in some way in the game itself, or it has a trophy related to it, because if all we do is fly through every game on easy, then we're not really enjoying them to their fullest. But like I said, I personally find it very hard to decide which difficulty to play on if there's no reason to play on anything higher than the lower settings. Now, John mentioned earlier about mundane grinds, doing the same thing over and over again just for a trophy, something that doesn't require any skill. Now, I mentioned that I was going to give you guys an example of this, and this is probably my most hated trophy of all time. It was a Gran Turismo 5 one. This is a game we spoke about on last week's show. It was the hardest and longest winded platinum I've ever earned. And there's one trophy on it that isn't difficult at all, but it's ridiculously time consuming. The trophy was for buying 1,000 cards. Now, I'm guessing the idea behind this was that they knew people were going to be playing the game for a long period of time because there's so much content, and they wanted you to just keep buying cars, all the cheap ones, trying to build up a collection, going into the second-hand car lot. But the problem with this trophy was that it just took so long to buy a car in the first place. So you would go into the car dealership, it would have to load that page, and then you'd find the manufacturer, and it would have to load that page, and then you'd click on the car and it would load up an image of the car. Then you'd go in to buy it and it would have to load again, and then you'd have to confirm the purchase, and then it would do like an animation of the car coming towards you. And it was just ridiculous. It took like a minute to buy a vehicle. So if you calculate it, it works out as somewhere between like 10 and 15 hours just to go through the motions of buying the cars themselves. And that is only if you're literally tapping the X button on the car dealership over and over again and buying the default car that it kind of first loads up. So the way I did it was I plugged in a USB keyboard and I just put a wait on the return button. I left, thankfully the cursor defaulted to the car dealership, and it would press on the car dealership and then it would press on the first one that it loads up. And so I had to buy a car that was worth, I think, 80,000. There was a car in the game that was worth 5,000. So, your wallet could hold 20 million credits. So you could earn enough, you could fill up your wallet once, and then you could go in and buy the go-kart, which was 5,000 credits. But that would require you to be there. And you'd literally have to spend 10 to 15 hours just sat there scrolling through. In fact, it would take longer because you'd have to scroll through all the car dealership or all the manufacturers and get to the go-kart manufacturer, and then go through the process of buying the go-kart from there. So that would take even longer, and of course it would require you to be there. So I wanted to do it while I was AFK. So what I had to do was I would farm money offline, B-spec races, or just rubber banding an oval track with a super fast car. I'd grind that overnight, again holding down the return button on my keyboard with a wait, so that once the race had finished it would automatically restart it. So then by the morning I might have 20 million credits. Then I would put the cursor over the car dealership and I would just put a wait on the button again, and it would buy, I think it was one of the NSXs, it was the Acura NSX. Because Acura was like the first manufacturer, because it was alphabetical. So I had to buy a car that was £80,000 over and over again, which meant I could only get, 80,000, 100,000, 69,000, 25 cars I could buy with one full wallet. So I'd do that while I was AFK, and then I'd have to farm more money and go through the process again. And that's the only way I could do it while I was AFK. Now, this is such a prime example of a mundane grind. You might say, why didn't I just have fun and buy all the cars and try them out? Well, that's ridiculous. That would have taken like 20 hours of just sat there going through the menus, purchasing vehicles. So yeah, I think this is probably my most hated trophy of all time. It's absolutely ridiculous and completely unnecessary. Now, there are two last types of trophies here that I'm going to mention. I do apologise if I've rambled on a bit. But the first one is when a trophy relates to events that are only available in the game every now and again. So when Destiny first released, there was a trophy for capturing a certain number of objectives in the salvage online game mode, the multiplayer mode, and the salvage mode didn't exist in the game. You had to literally wait for, I think it might have been a monthly event where it was up for a couple of days only, and that for me was ridiculous, because if you're on holiday during that time, or you just can't get online, then it makes the trophy impossible for you. Maybe they activate the mode on certain days when you're never available, so how do you earn the trophy, Project Cars is another one that had a trophy for completing 25 community events, and those community events were so random. They weren't at regular intervals. You had to literally follow them on Twitter, or keep looking at the website that would alert you as to when they were coming online. And I just missed so many of them, and it's just so frustrating. You want to just go in and earn the trophy, And I think it's ridiculous when they do that. Obviously, they're trying to make sure that people who have finished the game do come back and play it again just to earn the trophy, keep playing it at regular intervals to kind of keep the game active. Obviously, the community events was time trial based, so they wanted to make sure that those community events were active and a lot of people were playing them to motivate non-trophy hunters to jump on and try and beat the times. But still, I found that really annoying, especially when they're not at regular intervals. At the moment, I still have Plants vs. Zombies Garden Warfare 2 on the go, and there are events that I need to do. I'm a busy guy, I can't be checking every day to see if there's an event on the game, and I've missed tons of them. So I haven't 100%ed PVZ yet because I just haven't had a chance to keep up to date with when those events are becoming active. And if I do know when they are being activated, I just don't always have time on those days to be able to play. Finally, the last type of trophy that I really hate are ones that require you to sign up for something other than PSN. This really annoys me. Ubisoft have started doing this. EA, I think, have got Origin. I think Ubisoft is Uplay. It's a nice idea in the sense that when you earn trophies and achievements within the game, not so much the PSN trophies, but when you do things within the Ubisoft games, you do get points that you can then spend on items in other games. That's a nice idea, but just tie that to PSN, Now, the worst example of this was Portal 2. Now, to be able to play online on this, I think you had to sign up for Steam. I think it was Steam. And the problem with that is that you've now got two online connections that you can have issues with. So you've got PSN and Steam or whatever it is. And if you tried to plat this game a few years after it came out, then you had real problems because there was, a few trophies that require you to play online with a friend. And you need to then not only add them on PSN, but also add them on Steam. And then you need to connect to them through Steam. And it's just such a headache because after a few years, PSN works fine usually most of the time. But after a few years, they stopped sort of supporting the Steam connection on Portal 2 on PS3. So it took forever, most of the time it just wouldn't work. Now for me, this is completely unnecessary and it just adds a whole new layer of issues to games that should have been simple. You should be able to just connect over PSN, play with a friend and you're done. You can earn the trophies, that's fine. So it really annoys me. This is one of my most hated types of trophies when you start a game and one of the trophies is especially if it's an older game, they're not supporting as much anymore. And the trophy requires you to have to sign up for something else and you have to remember a whole new password and it just does my head in. Anyway, guys, there we go. They are some of my most hated trophies. That's my opinion on some of the trophies that John Rogers mentioned. I hope this has been enjoyable. I'm enjoying doing this series for you guys because it's interesting talking about all sorts of random different trophy-related subjects. But like I said at the start, if you would like to be able to suggest topics or ask me questions that I will cover during these videos, then check out the Patreon community. But thanks very much for watching, guys. I will have the Everybody's Gone to the Rapture guide up fairly soon. I did a lot of work to it yesterday and it's actually coming together really nicely. So it's actually going to turn out better than I expected. Hopefully that's going to help a lot of you out. Oh, and I will mention, guys, something I forgot to mention at the start of the video, which I should have done. This series is going to be moving to another day. It's up on Wednesday today, but it's going to be uploaded, I think, on Thursday evenings from now on. It's either going to be Thursday or Friday. When I say evening, I mean around 6 or 7 p.m. GMT, which will actually be sort of lunchtime, 1 or 2 p.m. for the East Coast. So if next week you're wondering where it is, if it's not uploaded on the Wednesday, that's why. I will be putting up a video soon outlining our plans for the 10,000 subscribers celebration video, so keep an eye out for that. Thanks for all your support, guys, and I look forward to catching you very soon. Cheers.